Hello, my name's John and I'm going to explain what I consider to be the easiest route to getting from dominant chords and dominant stroke Mixolydian scales into the altered note territory, the jazz territory. And in this particular instance we're going to be looking at the diminished scale over a dominant chord, which is talked about a lot, but this I consider to be the easiest way in, given that I would assume you know what a dominant chord is and some dominant chord shapes and what a dominant or Mixolydian scale is. So we're going to stick to one position, what I call the pure position, as I talked about in the last video, which is basically just 4 frets, 4 fingers without any shifts, and your first finger's on every string. So it's on the screen there. In terms of the major scale, you can consider this major scale movable position 3 or pattern 3. If you even number it like that, not every guitarist numbers their scale patterns the same, or even numbers their scale patterns. I don't use the cage system. But in terms of the dominant chord, the only dominant chord in that pattern on the screen, what I can call the pure pattern, is this, which you can see marked up there. So that's a dominant chord that you probably played before. Some of you would have played like thousands of times. Maybe some people this is the first time. But anyway, it's a really simple shape. Just a half bar with your first finger, with another finger on the top string 1 fret higher. I'm playing a D7, but it can play anywhere because it's a movable chord. So that's just a movable chord. We can play it anywhere. We can move this position anywhere. I'm not playing in D for any reason. Or D dominant, should I say. So that chord, a dominant chord, 1, 3, 5, 7. Technically the 7th is flat in relation to the root, but we'll just call it the 7th for now. So we've established that we're in the Mixolydian stroke dominant scale, and that we're playing a dominant chord, which is notes 1, 3, 5 and 7 from that scale, and that's the pattern there. Now a dominant scale is on the left. You can see that those are simply notes from that pattern, because that pattern is diatonic, and the diatonic system supports our Mixolydian scale, because Mixolydian is simply a mode of the diatonic system. 7 modes, 7 scales, 7 notes. End of story. Compared to the major, this starts on note 5. But we're going to call that note 1 because our heads are orientated in terms of Mixolydian, so everything is going to be stuck around that note 1 on the G string, and on the top E and bottom E by definition, of course. Your E strings have always got the same note on, of course. So our Mixolydian scale again. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Going down. And there's our dominant arpeggio. 1, 3, 5, 7. 1, 3, 5, 7. 1, 3, 5, 7. 8. So, playing over a dominant chord, simple. We cannot go wrong if we play notes in the chord. If you play notes in the chord, you cannot go wrong. That's like adding more beans on toast onto beans on toast. You can't go wrong. As a matter of fact, I consider that to be extremely right. Same with a chord. If you add a note that's in the chord, you cannot be wrong because it's already in the chord. Obviously, you're playing from a melody perspective, but the melody notes are often, very often, just the notes in the chord, depending on how big the chord is. This chord's got 4 notes, hasn't it? 4 notes is more than halfway towards the whole scale. Yeah? 7 notes in the scale, and we're playing 4 of them. Now, with a lot of, simple harmony music that doesn't get too involved in different keys and notes that are not in the key, etc., etc., undiatonic notes. A lot of musical genres and genres that I love as well, like folk music, rock music, would simply stick to those notes in that chord 1, 3, 5, 7, or in the Mixolydian scale 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 6, 7, 8. That's it, end of story. Would fit in perfectly, absolutely great. No need to add any other outside or more exotic notes, because that may well give just be not quite the done thing, dear boy, over a dominant chord, depending on the genre. But of course, when we get into slightly more exotic harmonies and notes and scales, i.e. jazz stuff, the mixed leading scale is great as well, as are the chord tones meaning the notes in the chord. But you will hear a lot of altered notes that are not diatonic, not in a standard dominant chord. And those altered notes are what we're going to play here. And the altered notes we're going to play are going to come straight from what we call the diminished scale. So on the right we have the diminished scale. Now, the tonic, the note 1, is the same for both of those diagrams. So our tonic is still on the G string and the E string. So the same tonic in the mixed leading scale as in our diminished scale, as in the same note as the root in the chord. There you go. G string root. And the E's. But as you can see, the pattern's different and there's an extra note. We have more notes in a diminished scale. Buy one, get one free. Well, buy 7, get one free. So it immediately is a bit odd, isn't it? The first thing we may notice is that notes 1, 3, 5 and 7 are the same as in our dominant stroke mixolydian scale. 1, 3, 5, 7, or the chord for that matter. 1, 3, 5, 7. Same notes as in the chord as in the mixolydian scale. We share those notes, 1, 3, 5, 7. But we have very different things going on around note 2. So we don't have a normal note 2, 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2 in our diminished scale. This is a half whole diminished scale, by the way. In other words, the first note above the tonic is close to the tonic, one semitone. That's what I call a semitone, like I just did, or you can call it a half tone, a sort of half step, as in America, I think, or just a small gap. One fret will do. It's a fret, one fret gap, as opposed to 2 frets to the normal 2. Our normal 2 is a 2 fret gap. This is a 1 fret gap, so we put a second finger down. So the pattern on that G string is not 1, 2, notes 1 to 2, it's 1, and we can call it a flat 2, because it's a 2 but flat. And then we've got, oh, what's that? We've got like a 2 that's sharp. We could call that a flat 3, but it seems the convention to call that a sharp 2, because we have a 3 on the next string, and it's nice to keep that 3 as a 3. That 3 is the only 3. So it seems to be quite a convention to say 1, flat 2, sharp 2, 3. 2 notes between notes 1 and 3, how weird is that? So 1 and 3 are normal, but we've got a flat 2 and a sharp 2 in between, or whatever you want to call them. 2 notes in between. Fingering is first finger, second, fourth, first, 1, 2, 4, 1. As we carry on up the scale, we can see that our next note is on the 3rd finger, 2 frets higher than the 3rd. So that's a sharp 4, it's not a normal 4. That's a sharp 4. Again, we're no longer in our diatonic key. We're no longer in mixolydian, because that's a sharp 4. Then we've got a normal 5. Remember, 1, 3, 5 are shared with both scales. So we've got a normal 5. So we've gone all the way up to the 5. Then we've got a normal 6. Then a normal 7. Okay, 5, 6, 7, exactly the same as the mixolydian scale. 1, flat 2, sharp 2, 3, sharp 4, 5, 6, 7. And then, of course, by definition, a normal 8, because our 1's normal. We always have a normal 8 and a normal 1. That's what 1 means. So the whole scale, that's our small big, half whole, semitone tone, diminished scale. And it's very simple because it feels very much like the dominant scale. We're adding a couple of notes between 1 and 3 and we're sharpening that 4th note. That's it. If I don't play either of those note 2s, it's only 1 note away from mixed Lydian. That's just mixed Lydian with a sharp 4. I'm not playing the 2 because I'm avoiding those altered 2s. 1, 3, sharp 4. If I play that, like I said before, you've got no idea whether I'm thinking mixed Lydian sharp 4 or Lydian dominant, we call it as well, but mixed Lydian sharp 4 will do, or dominant scale sharp 4, or I'm thinking the diminished scale. You don't know because you don't know what I would play if I played note 2. If I then played note 2 as this, then you pretty much know that I'm thinking diminished. Yeah. Or maybe I would stop thinking diminished a split second later and think something else. Who knows? We don't really know what guitarists are thinking a lot of the time, or other musicians, when they play notes that we consider nice. It could be an accident. It could just be notes that they think sound good. You know, they might not even be aware that it's similar or dissimilar to another particular pattern or whatever. But yeah, the whole thing, we call that the diminished scale. Small gap, big gap. 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 And the chord that it outlines, we can play like that. That's a diminished chord. Or it's a 7 flat 9. Yeah, I'm not playing the root there, but the root is on the G string. So if we consider that to still be a D7 chord, it's a D7 flat 9. But I'm not actually playing the D now. I could do. There's a D. It's a D7 flat 9. We can also call that a diminished chord with any of those letter notes that I'm playing there. So it would not be a D, because I'm not playing a D in that shape. But we can call that an A diminished, diminished 7, or E flat diminished, or an F sharp diminished, G sharp diminished, G flat diminished, or a C diminished, because the diminished chord can be repeated every 3 frets, as can the diminished scale. So everything we've played that's this diminished scale pattern and the diminished chord can be repeated every 3 frets. Which is nice. If you like moving your hand up and down like that. You don't have to. It's still the same notes, don't forget. Just because we can repeat it every 3 frets, it's still the same notes. We're just doing it somewhere else on the guitar. Keystone cop sound. We're getting back to the scale, because that's what this lesson's really about. It's about this scale over the dominant chord. Now notice on the D string, if I go down from note 1, we've got that 4 fret pattern as well. I'm going to ignore the note that's 1 fret to the left of our first finger. I'm going to ignore that. We're just going to play on the D, G, B and E strings. Just the top 4 strings, because that's where this pattern is really, really easy. It starts to get weird beneath the D string. But the top 4 strings is really easy because the pattern, if I play from the D string, note 5 in the scale in other words, we can see the pattern, finger-wise, is first finger, 3rd, 4th, first finger, 2nd, 4th, first finger, 3rd, 4th, first finger, 2nd, 4th. In other words, the pattern repeats. 1, 3, 4, 1, 2, 4, 1, 3, 4, 1, 2, 4. That pattern repeats, and it's always the same. That's the fingering I'm playing there, fingering. From the top string, from the top note, note 8. 4, 2, 1, and then 4, 3, 1, and then 4, 2, 1, then on the D string 4, 3, 1. Look at that easy pattern. We don't have to worry about that note beneath where we're playing our first finger, mostly. We can just stick there, just stick with what we just done, which is about an octave and a half. That's enough for most melodies. So when we improvise over that chord, we can play any of those notes, starting anywhere, ending anywhere, because those notes fit in great with the dominant scale, with the dominant chord. We can go from the dominant scale to the diminished scale, back to back. We can mix, we can go from one to the other in a split second. It all works. The diminished will sound more jazzy. That will sound more jazzy, yeah. More of a jazzy sound, as opposed to the Mixolydian. Or diminish. If we wanted to resolve, we would resolve back to our 1 chord. If that's our 5 chord, D7, our 1 chord is a G, major 7. And of course, jazz is largely about resolutions to the 1 chord. So we've got 5 chord to the 1 chord, the 5 chord, the 5 chord, we could even just think of that diminished chord shape, which is just 1 note away from our original dominant chord. Diminished chord, we could just play notes in that chord. Resolving to the 1, from chord 5 to chord 1. This is all the pure position, what I call the pure position, because in every position on guitar, we have every chord, every note. Incidentally, when we go outside of our diatonic system, we may well need an extra fret to the left or the right, but as you can see, in the top 4 strings, apart from that low note, the lowest note on the D string, we're not going out of our 4 fret pattern, our 4 fret box, we're not going out of. That's why this is an easy pattern to learn, in my opinion. So I'll play some dominant chords and I'll play over the top some of this diminished stuff and see what it sounds like. And it should sound, a bit more outside or jazzy than just the standard Mixolydian or the standard chord tones. there you go. I'll play something over the top now, and then, but you would have already seen it, of course, but I haven't. So hopefully it will sound okay. Bye bye. Okay, there you go. I was just thinking there, that diminished scale pattern. If I miss out those flat 9, sharp 4 notes, it obviously starts to sound a bit more normal dominant scale or mixed leading scale. But I was thinking of that pattern throughout all of that, pretty much. Trying to, anyway. And we can hear that it's that is that diminished scale sound, which you might only hear for half a second or so in terms of a 2-5-1 progression in jazz or something. You're unlikely to hear it for as long as I played it there. But you know, it is what it is. It works. If you like it, you like it. It's fine. In that sort of slightly more funky, upbeat way, it gives out all those unusual notes. And as I've said, it's an easy way of getting from that shape and from our mixed Lydian scale to our diminished scale. And you know, under your fingers it feels almost exactly the same, really. You know, we're getting rid of that 2 and swapping it for a flat 2 and a sharp 2, and we're getting rid of the 4 and swapping it to a sharp 4, but because we're only covering 4 frets, and we're using a lot of 1st and 4th finger, it feels very much the same. Within that pattern we have the diminished arpeggio, which doesn't start on the tonic, it starts on the 5th. That's normally the way we think about it. So, for instance, a D7 chord, the diminished arpeggio, it orientates around the chord starting on note 5 of the chord. And then we get that very distinctive diminished arpeggio sound, but not normally starting on the root. We could start, on the tonic. We could start on the tonic. Then we do actually get the notes in a diminished scale. 1, sharp 2, sharp 4. 6. But normally the diminished scale is the diminished chord is thought of as starting on the 5th of the dominant chord that it's played over. There I'm starting on the tonic, and those notes are in the diminished scale. So the thing is about the diminished chord starting on the 5th is that it has our 5th in the dominant chord, it has our 7, it has our flat 9, and it has our 3rd. So it covers all of those chord tones apart from note 1 in the dominant chord. So it seems to be a more stable diminished sound over the dominant chord, if you know what I mean. But the whole point of this is that you can play it fluently over a dominant chord, putting in these altered notes. And you do that by learning that pattern when you learn the dominant chord in that shape and the dominant scale, mixed leading scale, in starting from that shape, starting from that root note, tonic note. So as soon as you see that, wherever you are on the guitar, as soon as you see that chord, you can immediately put in those diminished diminished scale notes without even thinking about it. You can think of is the dominant scale as being those notes from the diminished scale, because they support all the notes in the dominant chord. Every time you play that chord, every time you see a dominant chord, regardless of what the letter, who cares about the letter, it doesn't really matter. In terms of just the dominant chord, it doesn't matter. That shape you can associate with those notes. I'm starting on the 5th there, but who cares? I'm starting on the 5th of the chord, and I'm playing that diminished scale pattern, or notes from it. And if you want to hear it resolve back to the 1, resolving back to the 1. The 1 meaning chord 1 in the associated major key of that dominant chord. So that dominant chord is called a 5 chord. 5 meaning it's the 5th of the associated major key. So that major key, major chord, is the 1 to the dominant chord, which is the 5. And we can put the 2 in, 2, 5. We can add those diminished chord as well. The 7 flat 9. Then to the 1. So we can think of the dominant chord as including all those diminished notes. The more we practice it, the more we practice those diminished notes every time we play a dominant chord, so they become one and the same. And we can always go back to the normal dominant scale. We can mix them in. If I play that, if I do this, I'm thinking dominant scale, and then I'm putting in that sharp 4, or putting them both back to back. Diminished scale, flat 2, and then the normal 2 from the dominant scale. We could even mix all the notes from both 2 scales. So we've got the flat 2, normal 2, flat 3. Sorry, my mistake, sharp 2. So we've got almost like a chromatic run-up. That's fine as well. Who knows what someone's thinking when they play that? Are they thinking chromatic scale? Or are they just mixing those 2 scales, the dominant scale and the diminished? Or are they just going 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3 with the fingers and they like the sound of it? Maybe. If it sounds good over the chord, it is good, regardless of the way you think of it. That's it. Anyway, I hope some of that makes some sense. This is certainly the way I think of a diminished scale pattern over that shape. Of course, every dominant chord shape would have its associated diminished scale pattern with it. But as that pattern changes every 3 frets, we end up playing the same patterns all the time. Just as an aside, I was talking about the pure position. But if I play a dominant chord, that's not the pure position, but I can play that dominant chord, standard dominant chord, root notes on the E strings. The diminished scale associated with that is the same pattern we just played on the same fret. So it's literally the same thing that we played over the other dominant shape, but this time we're playing it over this, what I call type 1, root notes on the E string, dominant chord with the root notes on the E string as a bar. We've all played that before, I think. So there we've got the same pattern. It's exactly the same pattern over the dominant chord. this time the particular chord tones in the chord are different to the notes in the diminished scale pattern, but it doesn't matter. That note there in the other shape was the sixth, but over this shape that note is the tonic. But it doesn't matter. It's still it's still a diminished pattern over a dominant chord. So we've learnt two dominant chords and their associated diminished patterns today. And the other one that people play, which is that shape, again, that's very, very almost exactly the same anyway, because with that pattern, with that chord, root note on the A string, standard dominant bar, root note on the A string. With that pattern, we just move one fret to the left, and then we've got our diminished scale. Exactly the same pattern. So that's all the same pattern. We can associate the same pattern with all of those three dominant chord shapes. As a matter of fact, every dominant chord shape. Because the beauty of the diminished scale is because it repeats every 3 frets. We're never far away from the right pattern. We're never more than 1 fret away from the right pattern. And it's the same pattern as that I've been playing for the whole of this lesson. We're never more than 1 fret away from that pattern because of the fact that the diminished scale repeats every 3 frets. So that pattern that we've learnt today, from the D string upwards, can be played over all of our dominant chords. And you just have to check that it's either in the same position or you're 1 fret to the left or 1 fret to the right, sort of thing. But it will be that pattern, and it will be very close to every dominant chord, whether it's that shape of course we played today, that shape I've just played, that shape I've just played. Another one is there, another one. Yeah. Again, it's only 1 fret away from that. Anyway, I hope that makes sense. To me, this is the go-to diminished scale pattern to get you into that mindset of playing these altered notes over a dominant chord. And in the next video, I'll probably do the altered scale as well. So the altered scale is even more altered than the diminished scale. It's even more altered, but the principle's the same. We associate a scale pattern with a chord shape because we learn chords, we play the same shapes invariably again and again and again. So we're familiar with the chord shapes, so we would tie a diminished scale or an altered scale or a mixed Lydian scale or any scale to that chord shape, so that we're building on what we're already familiar with already, if you know your chord shapes. Okay, thank you very much. I hope that made some sense. If you want me to describe anything else musically that you like or you'd like to know more about, if you don't think you know enough about it already, let me know below, and I'll do a video about anything. Doesn't have to be something that I play regularly. I'd like to do that. It'd be fun. Something different as well. Okay, thanks. Bye bye.